Republicans have talked about this for a long time. We've done lots of press conferences. We've done lots of trips to the border. We've done lots of moments to be able to say something needs to be done. This is our something moment.
That was Oklahoma Senator James Lankford shortly before his Republican colleagues in the Senate overwhelmingly shot down a bipartisan border bill that Senator Lankford had helped write. The senator now under attack by many in his party for his role in that legislation. Lankford's fellow Oklahoma Senator Markwayne Mullin was one of the many Republicans to vote against that bill, and we certainly appreciate him taking the time to join us live right here at 4 o'clock. Senator Mullin, thanks for being with us. We appreciate the time.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me start with this right now, and that's just the reason for the no vote. Obviously, many Republicans voting no on this. Why were you a no vote?
Well, first of all, James is a great guy. James did the best he could, but he was negotiating with Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer, who wants an open border, and he's the only Republican at the table. My vote doesn't reflect anything on James or the conservative strong values that he has. It's more of the way Schumer brought the process up. Biden and Schumer drug this process out. They tried to poison the bill as much as they could, and at the end of the day, when we wanted to try putting amendments on the bill, they were going to use a tactic called stack the tree, where they basically, the leader, Schumer, would put all the amendments available on the tree and not allow Republicans to have a vote on it. With that being the case, there's no way we as Republicans could support it. James needed help to make the bill even better. And he said that, but without the amendments being there, there was just no way Republicans could support it.
I mean, the way that Senator Lankford was talking about the bill, Senator Mullin, he was saying that he thought that the bill as it was written could have been passed and it would have made a big deal. Now, he did say that he was open to amendments, but of course, that vote this week, it was not to pass the bill. It was actually to get it to the Senate floor where those amendments were possible. Right. The stack the tree, that is some inside baseball. I know that a lot of people that follow politics know nothing about. I mean, is there anything else that went into your no vote, or was it just the process on how it was put together?
The process. Now, James, I want to repeat this. James is a remarkable man, has been accused even by a lot of local politicians in the state by being an immoral man. And I laugh about that, because if James Lankford's immoral, then my goodness, I'm swimming in fire, because he is a strong Christian conservative individual. But he was put up against an impossible situation. That the bill did have a lot of positive things in it. Don't get me wrong. There was a lot of stuff about the asylum and about the pro process. But there was a lot more we could do about the illegals, about coming across the border, what the president's authorities were at. There was a lot of things that we wanted to try seeing changed. And without Schumer allowing Republicans to have amendments on it, it just really backed us all off of it. And James, he was the author of the bill as a co-author with the Democrats. So it kind of forced him to vote for it. However, he did want the amendments in there. When he came to the conference, he says, listen, we've got to put amendments on there to make this even a stronger border bill. But it got away from us. It's not the policy sometimes up here as much as the politics. And there was a lot of people that went out even before they had a chance to read the bill and said they weren't going to vote for the bill, which essentially at that point killed it.
He gave a really powerful speech on the Senate floor, Senator, before that vote was made, where he encouraged this vote to pass because he said that something needs to be done. He said, we've been talking about it ad nauseum because, as so many people agree, the situation down at the border is a mess. It's chaotic, and I know that that's how you feel. That's how Senator Lankford feels. That's how many Democrats feel. He said that now was the time, and I think a lot of people now are looking at this and saying, does this set us back potentially years from a possible legislative solution?
Well, first of all, there's already plenty of legislation put in place that Joe Biden can do right now to secure the border. In fact, I put a tweet out that I guess it's an X, I guess is what you call it now, that named 10 things that are well within the executive orders, which are exactly what President Trump did when he was in office to secure the border, that President Biden overturned by executive orders the first day he was in office, which has caused the mess here. But what we do need to address is the asylum and the pro process. People shouldn't just simply be able to cross the border anywhere, even at illegal entry points, and say, I fear my government, and get access to the United States. That's why we had Remain in Mexico put in place when Trump was there, which is what got overturned when Biden got into office. We need to put legislation in place to keep them from being able to do executive orders and overturn stuff like Biden did. This bill actually did that. So there was a lot of positive stuff in it, but we have to be able to make the bill better. And the way Schumer was going to eliminate that process by stacking the tree on us, it just pushed a lot of us off that really wanted to support James Lankford and what he did and the hard work he put in, and poisoned the whole bill. And it was unfortunate for James.
On a broader question here, just a higher altitude look down at the Congress as a whole, I know that a lot of people are really worried right now. They see all the issues that need to be tackled, and they see the fighting back and forth. And even after you get a Democrat, an independent, and a Republican together, they put this together, and then it falls apart before it could even get to the floor, really. People worry that they're more concerned, lawmakers are, at winning in politics than they actually are at solving problems. And I'd love to hear how you respond to something like that.
Well, keep in mind, not all Republicans voted, or not all Democrats voted for the bill either. He had lost a tremendous amount of his majority too. So he didn't even have the ability for the majority to be able to get 51 on it. And so this was a bill that neither side really cared for. I still remind people, Congress was designed to work, unfortunately, in a dysfunctional way. That's the way our founding fathers set it up. And if you read the Federalist Papers, they'll tell you that they wanted a thoughtful debate, which is exactly what the Senate is supposed to do, have a thoughtful debate. The House moves a lot faster than the Senate. But when you have a leader in Chuck Schumer that's going to take that debate away just because he's leader and take away what our founding fathers wanted was an actual debate to get it right, then it automatically kills it. So it is frustrating for us because we allow politics to get in the way of policy. And I say this all the time, that it's never the policy that's important. It's the timing that's important. The timing means the politics have to be right before the policy can pass. If this bill was probably ready to be put in front of Congress, let's say after Thanksgiving, this would have probably had a really good chance to pass. But the longer this went out, the politics got in the way of the policy, and there was a lot of people that, as I would say, got ginned up and made an opinion before they even read the bill.
When you're talking about the timing, Senator, are you talking about the presidential election year, that we're getting too close to that?
Absolutely. It's the election year, and people start running for the hills when it's election year. No one wants to take a hard vote, and they let the perception, which is what happened here because we have social media. They allowed, and the social media will outrun the truth most of the time. You allow social media to draw your opinion rather than actually the politics behind it, or the politics behind it rather than the policy to drive it. And that is, you got too close to the election year. And it's not just a presidential year. Remember, there's a third of the Senate's up for election, and every House member's up for election.
But is that an okay factor? You're talking about it as if it's negative. I just want to make sure.
Not.
I just want to ask you.
It's not an okay factor.
It's not. So that should have, like, a presidential election year should have no bearing on how senators
It shouldn't, but it does, and that's exactly why Chuck Schumer, instead of allowing us to put amendments on this bill, that's why he was going to stack the tree and keep Republicans from being able to put amendments on it to make the border even stronger. I go back to say this: Chuck Schumer and the Democrat Party, led by Joe Biden, they want an open border. If they wanted to secure the border, they could simply reverse the executive orders that he put in place on day one. And even Joe Biden himself said if we were to pass this, that he would shut the border down. He doesn't need this passed. He could shut the border down now, but he didn't. It was all about politics for him.
Senator Markwayne Mullin joining us live here at 4 o'clock. We thank you for your time, Senator. We appreciate it. Have a good weekend.